Unaware she owned a hidden trillion-dollar oil fortune, he threw her out while she was in labor, leaving her screaming on the doorstep with nowhere to go. What she did next made him fall to his knees when he discovered the truth. But by then, the woman he'd abandoned had already decided his fate. The rain hammered against the wooden porch like bullets as Elena Hartwell doubled over, another contraction ripping through her body with the force of a freight train. Her husband Marcus stood in the doorway of their farmhouse, his silhouette backlit by the warm glow of the home they'd shared for 7 years, his arms crossed in a gesture that had become painfully familiar over the past months. "I said get out," Marcus repeated, his voice devoid of the warmth it once held, when he'd whispered promises of forever into her ear on their wedding night. "Take your worthless inheritance and leave. You've got 10 minutes before I call the police for trespassing." Elena's fingers gripped the porch railing so hard her knuckles turned white, the wood rough against her palm as lightning split the Texas sky. The inheritance, that cursed piece of land her grandmother had left her, 200 acres of barren West Texas desert that had somehow become the weapon Marcus used to destroy their marriage. Land he'd called worthless from the moment the lawyer had read her grandmother's will 5 years ago. Land he now demanded she sign over to him as the price of a civilized divorce. "The baby," Elena gasped, clutching her swollen belly as water streamed down her face, rain mixing with tears she refused to shed in front of him. "Marcus, please. Our baby is coming." His jaw tightened, and for a fraction of a second, Elena thought she saw something flicker in his eyes. Remorse, perhaps, or the ghost of the man she'd fallen in love with at that Houston charity gala 7 years ago. The man who'd brought her coffee every morning at the law firm where she worked as a legal secretary. The man who'd kissed her in the rain after their 3rd date and promised he'd never let anything hurt her. That man was dead, killed by greed and ambition and the discovery that Elena's grandmother's land, the land he'd mocked and belittled, might hold something he wanted. "Should have thought about that before you refused to sign," Marcus said, bending down to grab her overnight bag from beside the door. He hurled it into the storm and it landed in a puddle near her old Honda Civic with a splash that seemed to echo across the empty fields. "My lawyer made it crystal clear, Elena. Sign over that land and we can end this marriage like adults. Keep being stubborn and you get nothing. Not this house, not a dime of my money, and certainly not my help tonight." The door slammed with a finality that reverberated through Elena's chest, and she was alone in the October storm, 9 months pregnant and abandoned by the man who'd vowed to love her in sickness and in health. She'd met Marcus Hartwell when she was 25 and drowning in the aftermath of her parents' death. They'd died in a car accident when Elena was 19, leaving her with nothing but student loan debt and the memory of her mother's laugh. Her grandmother Rose, her mother's mother, had been her only anchor in those dark years, a fierce, weathered woman who'd survived the Japanese occupation of China as a child, who'd fled to America with nothing and built a life through sheer determination on 200 acres of West Texas desert. "Exun Gan Bao Bei," her grandmother would say, calling her precious treasure in Mandarin. "You are stronger than you know. Chen women survive." Marcus had seemed like salvation when he'd approached her at that charity gala, all charm and confidence in his tailored suit. He was a junior executive at Hartwell Energy Solutions, his family's oil and gas exploration company, and he'd pursued Elena with an intensity that made her feel wanted for the first time since her parents died. "You're too beautiful to look so sad," he'd said, handing her champagne. "Bad day?" "Bad year," she'd replied, and somehow that had been enough to start a conversation that lasted until dawn. He'd courted her with expensive dinners and weekend trips to places she'd only seen in magazines. He'd made her laugh again, made her feel like life might have joy in it after all. When he proposed 6 months later on a beach in Maui, she'd said yes without hesitation. Her grandmother had been quiet at the wedding, watching Marcus with dark eyes that seemed to see through his polished exterior. "Be careful, Exengan Bao Bei," she'd whispered in Mandarin during the reception. "Some men love what you have more than who you are." Elena had dismissed it as old-world skepticism, the wariness of a woman who'd survived too much loss. She'd been so grateful to have found love again that she'd ignored the warning signs, the way Marcus's smile never quite reached his eyes when they visited her grandmother, the way he'd always find excuses to leave early, the way he'd grimace when Elena spoke Mandarin with Rose. Her grandmother had died 3 months after the wedding, alone in the small house on those 200 acres, and Elena had discovered the inheritance that would ultimately destroy her marriage. The land came with a handwritten letter in her grandmother's shaky script, half in English and half in Mandarin. "This land holds our family's future. Never let anyone take it from you. Chen women survive, and we protect what is ours." Marcus had been excited at first, seeing dollar signs in the inheritance. 200 acres? Do you know what that's worth? But his excitement had curdled into frustration when every developer and investor he contacted laughed at the proposition. The land was too remote, too dry, too far from infrastructure. It was worthless desert, good for nothing but grazing rattlesnakes and tumbleweeds. "We're hemorrhaging money on property taxes," Marcus had complained after the 5th rejection. "Your grandmother stuck you with a millstone, and you're too sentimental to see it." Elena had refused to sell. It was all she had left of her family, the last piece of her grandmother's legacy. They'd fought about it constantly, and with each argument, Marcus's mask had slipped a little more. The affairs had started in their 2nd year of marriage. Elena had found the hotel receipts tucked in his jacket pocket, the credit card statements showing charges at restaurants she'd never been to. When she'd confronted him, he'd turned it back on her. "What did you expect, Elena? You've let yourself go. You're obsessed with a dead woman and a worthless piece of dirt. You're not the woman I married." She'd stayed because leaving meant admitting failure, meant facing the world alone again. And then, impossibly, she'd gotten pregnant. For a brief, shining moment, she'd thought the baby might save them, might remind Marcus of the promises he'd made. Instead, it had made everything worse. "Is it even mine?" he'd asked when she told him about the pregnancy, and something inside Elena had broken irreparably. Now, standing in the rain with contractions coming every 3 minutes, Elena grabbed her soaked overnight bag and stumbled toward her car. Her phone was in the bag, her wallet, everything she'd need to survive the next few hours. She could call an ambulance, or she could drive herself to St. Michael's Hospital 20 minutes away on the highway. She chose to drive. Every bump in the road sent shockwaves of pain through her body as she navigated the dark highway, her hands gripping the steering wheel so hard they ached. Lightning illuminated the flat Texas landscape in brief, stark flashes, oil derricks in the distance, their rhythmic pumping a reminder of the wealth that flowed beneath this land, wealth that had built Marcus's family fortune, wealth that his company specialized in finding and extracting, wealth that, according to Marcus, would never be found on her grandmother's worthless acres. She made it to the emergency room entrance at 11:47 p.m., honking her horn until orderlies rushed out with a wheelchair. "My water broke," she gasped as they wheeled her through automatic doors into fluorescent brightness. "The baby's coming." "Is your husband on his way?" a nurse asked, and Elena shook her head violently. "No husband. Don't call him. Don't let him near me if he comes." The nurse's expression shifted to understanding. She'd seen this before. Women arriving alone and desperate, fleeing from something worse than the pain of childbirth. Elena's daughter was born at 2:47 a.m., small and fierce and screaming with a fury that made Elena laugh through her tears. She named her Rose Margaret Chen Hartwell, after her grandmother, the woman who'd survived war and displacement, and built something from nothing. "She's perfect," Dr. Patel said, placing the baby on Elena's chest, and Elena believed it with every atom of her being. She stayed in the hospital for 2 days, and during that time, she made plans. She wouldn't go back to Marcus. She wouldn't sign over the land. She would file for divorce on her own terms, find a job, find daycare, figure out how to survive as a single mother. She had Rose now, and Rose needed her to be strong. On the morning of her discharge, a man in an expensive charcoal suit appeared in her hospital room. He was in his 60s, Chinese American, with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Mrs. Hartwell, I'm Robert Chen, your grandmother's cousin," he said, offering his hand. "I apologize for not reaching out sooner. I've been working overseas and only recently learned of Rose's passing. I'm deeply sorry for your loss." Elena shifted baby Rose in her arms, wary. "I didn't know my grandmother had family in America besides me." "The Chen family scattered after the war," Robert explained, settling into the visitor's chair. "Rose and I lost touch for many years, but I've been watching over her interests as best I could." He paused, his expression growing serious. "I need to speak with you about the land she left you. It's urgent." Elena's heart sank. Not another person trying to convince her to sell. "If you're here to tell me it's worthless, I've heard it already. I'm not selling." "Worthless?" Robert's eyebrows rose. "Mrs. Hartwell, Elena, that land is anything but worthless. Has no one conducted a proper geological survey? My husband tried to sell it 5 years ago. Every expert he consulted said it was dry, useless desert." Robert pulled out a leather portfolio from his briefcase, extracting documents that he spread across Elena's bedside table. "3 months ago, I commissioned an independent survey using the latest technology. Elena, beneath your grandmother's land lies one of the largest untapped oil reserves discovered in North America in the last 50 years. Conservative estimates value it at over $1 trillion. The room seemed to tilt. Elena clutched Rose tighter, certain she'd misheard. "That's impossible. Marcus's company would have found it. They're experts in—" She stopped, realization dawning cold and terrible. "How long have you known?" 3 months. I tried to contact you repeatedly, but someone was intercepting my calls and letters." Robert's voice gentled. "Elena, I need to ask you something important. In the past few months, has your husband pressured you to sign over the land?" Elena's blood turned to ice. The divorce papers Marcus had shoved at her 6 weeks ago. The constant demands that she sign over the property as part of their settlement. His sudden insistence that they end the marriage quickly, cleanly, with her giving up any claim to his assets, in exchange for him walking away from hers. He'd known. Somehow Marcus had known about the oil. "He threw me out last night," Elena whispered, "while I was in labor. He said if I didn't sign over the land, I'd get nothing in the divorce." Robert's jaw tightened with barely suppressed anger. "I suspected as much. Hartwell Energy Solutions conducted their own survey 2 months ago. I have the records. They deliberately kept the results from you while Marcus maneuvered to steal your inheritance." "Can he do that? Can he just take it?" "Not if you don't sign anything. The land is in your name alone, inherited property that's not subject to community property laws in Texas. But Elena, you need to understand the magnitude of what you're sitting on. We're not talking about a comfortable retirement. We're talking about generational wealth, power, the ability to change your life and the lives of thousands of others." Elena looked down at Rose, sleeping peacefully in her arms, unaware that she'd been born into a war. "What do I do?" "First, you let me help you file for divorce with lawyers who actually work for you, not Marcus. Second, you let me connect you with the team of energy consultants and legal experts who can help you develop this land properly. And third," Robert smiled, and it was a smile her grandmother would have recognized, You let the Chen family teach you how survivors become victors. Elena discharged herself from the hospital that afternoon against medical advice, driven by Robert to a secure location, a downtown Houston hotel where he'd arranged a suite under a false name. Over the next week, while she recovered and bonded with Rose, Robert assembled a team: lawyers, geologists, energy consultants, financial advisors. Each one came with impeccable credentials and a fierce determination to protect Elena's interests. The geologist, Dr. Sarah Martinez, spread surveys and charts across the hotel suite's conference table. The formation runs deep, but with modern extraction technology, it's entirely viable. We're looking at an estimated 50 billion barrels of recoverable oil, at current prices conservatively valued at $1.3 trillion. Your grandmother's land sits right on top of the primary deposit. How did everyone miss this? Elena asked, rocking Rose's bassinet with her foot. They didn't miss it, Dr. Martinez said grimly. Hartwell Energy Solutions knew exactly what was there. They just needed to acquire the land before anyone else caught on. From what Robert tells us, Marcus has been systematically isolating you, preventing you from seeking independent advice, pushing you to sign away your rights. The lawyer, Catherine Wong, a sharply dressed woman in her 40s, added, "We've filed for divorce on your behalf, and we've also filed an injunction preventing Marcus from coming within 500 feet of you or baby Rose. Additionally, we're pursuing fraud charges related to his concealment of the oil survey and his attempt to defraud you of your inheritance." Elena felt like she was watching her life from outside her body. None of this seemed real. A week ago, she'd been a pregnant woman trapped in a failing marriage. Now she was apparently sitting on a $1 trillion fortune while lawyers discussed fraud charges against her husband. "What will Marcus do when he finds out?" she asked. Catherine and Robert exchanged glances. "He already knows you've left the hospital," Robert said. "He's been calling your phone non-stop, leaving messages that range from apologetic to threatening. He's also hired a team of lawyers, which suggests he knows his scheme is falling apart." "I want to see him," Elena said suddenly. "I want to face him." "That's not advisable," Catherine began, but Elena shook her head. "I spent 7 years letting him diminish me, letting him convince me I was worthless. I need him to see that I'm not. I need him to understand exactly what he threw away." Robert studied her with the same penetrating gaze her grandmother used to have. "Chen women survive," he said softly, "and sometimes they require justice. If you're certain, we can arrange a controlled meeting." They scheduled it for 2 weeks later, giving Elena time to recover from childbirth and prepare. Catherine insisted the meeting take place in a law office with security present. Marcus's lawyers would be there too. It would be a formal negotiation session for the divorce settlement. Elena spent those 2 weeks transforming herself. Robert connected her with financial advisors who explained the magnitude of her wealth and the responsibilities that came with it. She learned about drilling rights, lease agreements, environmental regulations, and the intricate dance of the energy industry. She hired a nanny to help with Rose so she could focus, and she studied the oil surveys until she could discuss reservoir depths and extraction costs with confidence. She also shopped. For 7 years, Marcus had controlled their finances, giving her an allowance and criticizing every purchase. Now she walked into designer boutiques with her grandmother's inherited strength and bought a suit that cost more than her old car. Midnight blue, perfectly tailored, with heels that made her stand taller than she ever had in her marriage. The morning of the meeting, she fed Rose, kissed her daughter's perfect forehead, and left her with the nanny Robert had vetted. Then she walked into the conference room of Wong and Associates with her head high. Marcus was already there, and the shock on his face was worth every moment of pain she'd endured. He'd expected the broken, desperate woman he'd thrown out in the rain. Instead, he faced someone who looked like she owned the world. Because she did. "Elena," he started, half rising from his chair, but she held up a hand. "Sit down, Marcus. We have business to discuss." His lawyers, 3 men in identical gray suits, shifted uncomfortably. Catherine Wong took her place beside Elena, laying out documents with precise efficiency. "Let's begin," Catherine said. "Mr. Hartwell, your client is here to present his settlement offer for the divorce proceedings. Mrs. Hartwell has reviewed your proposal and has a counteroffer." Marcus's lead attorney, a man named Brennan who looked like he charged by the breath, cleared his throat. "Our client is prepared to be generous. He'll waive any claim to Mrs. Hartwell's inherited property in exchange for her waiving any claim to marital assets or alimony. Clean break, no complications." Elena almost laughed. He still thought he could manipulate her. "Counteroffer," she said calmly. Marcus signs away all parental rights to Rose, agrees to a lifetime restraining order, and pays $10 million for the emotional distress caused by his abandonment while I was in active labor. In exchange, I won't pursue criminal fraud charges for his deliberate concealment of the oil survey and his attempt to defraud me of my inheritance. Marcus's face went crimson. "Fraud? You're insane. I never—" "You commissioned a geological survey through Hartwell Energy Solutions 8 weeks ago," Catherine interrupted, sliding documents across the table. "These are copies of the internal reports showing you knew about the oil deposits beneath Elena's property. You then spent the next 6 weeks psychologically manipulating your pregnant wife to sign over her land while concealing information that would have revealed its true value. That's textbook fraud, Mr. Hartwell." "She has no proof," Brennan began, but Robert Chen, sitting quietly beside Elena, spoke for the first time. "We have testimony from the geologist you hired, Dr. James Patterson. He's prepared to testify that you ordered him to falsify the initial reports to show no viable deposits. We also have emails between you and your board members discussing acquisition strategies for the land, and we have recordings of phone calls where you discussed ways to force Elena to relinquish the property before she discovered its value." Marcus stared at Robert, recognition slowly dawning. "You're the one who's been interfering. You turned her against me." "No, Marcus," Elena said, her voice steady. "You did that yourself the night you threw me out while I was in labor. You did that every time you belittled me, every time you cheated, every time you made me feel worthless. I'm not against you because someone turned me. I'm against you because you showed me exactly who you are." "Elena, please." Marcus's voice cracked, and for a moment, he sounded like the man she'd married. "We can work this out. Think about Rose. She deserves to have her father in her life. Rose deserves a father who would have helped her mother get to the hospital instead of leaving her to suffer in a storm. You made your choice, Marcus. Now live with it." Marcus pushed back from the table, his chair scraping against hardwood. He looked at Elena with something that might have been desperation or might have been rage. "You think this makes you powerful. You think having money changes who you are. You're still the same pathetic woman who couldn't let go of a worthless piece of dirt because your dead grandmother left it to you." Elena stood, meeting his eyes without flinching. "That worthless piece of dirt is worth over $1 trillion, Marcus, and it's mine. Every acre, every barrel of oil, every dollar of revenue it generates. Mine. My grandmother knew something you never understood, that real wealth isn't about what you take from others. It's about what you build, what you protect, and who you become in the process." She walked to the door, then paused. "You wanted me to sign away my inheritance? Here's what I'm going to do instead. I'm going to develop that land responsibly, creating jobs and opportunities for people who actually need them. I'm going to establish a foundation in my grandmother's name to help women escape situations like the one you put me in. And every single day, I'm going to wake up and remember that the best decision I ever made was refusing to let you diminish me. Elena, wait! Marcus lunged forward, but security guards stepped between them as he dropped to his knees. Please, we can start over. I'll change. I love you. Elena looked down at the man who'd thrown her out in the rain, who'd called their daughter a bastard, who'd tried to steal her inheritance through lies and manipulation. She felt nothing but pity. No, Marcus, she said quietly. You loved what you thought I had. You never loved me. She walked out without looking back, and the sound of Marcus begging her to reconsider faded behind the closing door. 3 months later, Elena stood on her grandmother's land, her land, watching the first drilling operation begin. Rose was strapped to her chest in a baby carrier, gurgling happily as the machinery hummed to life. The desert stretched in every direction, and beneath it lay the future her grandmother had somehow known would come. Robert stood beside her, silver hair gleaming in the Texas sun. Rose would be proud, he said. Chen women survive. And sometimes, Elena added, kissing her daughter's head, they thrive. The derrick began to pump, and Elena smiled. She'd been thrown out with nothing, left to suffer and struggle and fight for every breath. But she'd survived, and in surviving she'd discovered something Marcus never understood. Real power didn't come from what you took from others. It came from knowing your own worth and refusing to let anyone convince you otherwise. She'd fallen to her knees in that storm, broken and alone. Now Marcus was the one on his knees, begging for mercy she had no obligation to give. Justice, Elena decided, looked a lot like watching your enemies realize they destroyed themselves. 5 years later, the conference room on the 47th floor of Chen Hartwell Tower overlooked downtown Houston like a glass and steel throne room. Elena stood at the window watching the city pulse with afternoon traffic, her reflection ghosting against the skyline. Behind her, the quarterly board meeting had just concluded, another record-breaking quarter for Chen Energy Solutions, the company she'd built from the ashes of her grandmother's legacy. Mama, look what Auntie Catherine gave me. Rose's voice echoed through the room as the 5-year-old bounded in, her pigtails flying, clutching a stuffed oil derrick that someone had clearly commissioned as a joke gift. Catherine Wong followed at a more measured pace, her briefcase in one hand and an indulgent smile on her face. I told her it was inappropriate, Catherine said, not sounding sorry at all. But apparently I'm the fun aunt now. Elena laughed, scooping Rose into her arms. Her daughter had her grandmother's fierce spirit and stubborn chin, combined with Elena's dark eyes and an inherited refusal to be told what she couldn't do. Just last week, Rose had informed her preschool teacher that she was going to be the boss of all the oil when she grew up, which had prompted an awkward parent-teacher conference and a lecture about encouraging more balanced career aspirations in young girls. Elena had promptly enrolled Rose in an additional engineering summer camp. How did the meeting go? Robert Chen asked, entering from the adjacent office. At 70 now, he showed no signs of slowing down, serving as chairman of the board while Elena handled day-to-day operations as CEO. Morrison Energy is officially off the table, Elena replied, setting Rose down to play with her new toy. They came back with a counteroffer, $800 billion for controlling interest in the western fields. Robert's eyebrows rose. That's substantial. It's insulting, Elena corrected. Those fields alone will generate twice that in the next decade. I told them if they want to negotiate, they can start at fair value or stop wasting our time. Catherine pulled out her tablet, scrolling through notes. Speaking of negotiations, the Foundation Gala is next month. We've had requests from 3 governors, 2 senators, and approximately 700 nonprofit organizations asking for FaceTime with you. The Rose Chen Foundation had become one of the largest charitable organizations in North America, focusing on supporting women leaving abusive relationships, funding education for displaced immigrants, and providing resources for single mothers. In 5 years, it had helped over 10,000 women escape situations similar to the one Elena had endured, giving them legal support, housing assistance, and job training. It had also become the thorn in Marcus Hartwell's side that Elena had never intended but thoroughly enjoyed. "Has he RSVP'd yet?" Elena asked, though she already knew the answer. Catherine's smile turned sharp. "Marcus Hartwell has sent his regrets for the 5th consecutive year. However, his lawyers did send another letter requesting you reconsider the restraining order, citing his desire to establish a relationship with his daughter." Rose looked up from her toy. "Who's Marcus?" "No one important, Bao Bei," Elena said softly, using her grandmother's endearment. The restraining order had held firm through multiple legal challenges. Marcus had been allowed supervised visitation when Rose turned 3, but after he'd spent the entire first session trying to extract information about Elena's business dealings from a toddler, even the court-appointed supervisor had recommended suspending his parental rights. He'd appealed, of course, he always appealed. "There's something else," Robert said, his tone shifting to something more serious. "Hartwell Energy Solutions filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection this morning." Elena turned from the window, surprised despite herself. "I thought they were stabilizing." "They were until their main investor pulled out. Apparently someone sent evidence of Marcus's fraud case to their board, and they decided the liability wasn't worth the risk." Robert's expression remained carefully neutral, but Elena caught the glimmer in his eye. "Someone," Elena repeated. "How convenient." "Quite. There's more. The bankruptcy means their assets will be liquidated, including Marcus's personal holdings. The farmhouse where you used to live is going to auction next month." Elena felt something twist in her chest. Not quite pain, but not quite satisfaction either. The farmhouse. The place where she'd tried so hard to build a life, where she'd endured 7 years of slowly diminishing herself to fit Marcus's image of what a wife should be. The porch where he'd thrown her out in the rain. "Buy it," she said suddenly. Catherine looked up sharply. "Elena, are you sure that's—" "Buy it, demolish it, build something useful there, a shelter maybe, or transitional housing for the foundation's clients. I don't want Marcus to have anything left that he can use to hurt anyone else." Robert nodded slowly. "Chen, women survive. And we protect others so they can survive too," Elena finished. Her phone buzzed, a text from the nanny saying that Rose's martial arts class was confirmed for tomorrow. Elena had enrolled her daughter in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu at 4 years old, determined that Rose would grow up knowing how to defend herself, how to stand firm, how to never let anyone make her feel small. "I need to head out," Elena said, gathering her things. "Rose has piano in an hour, and I promised we'd stop for ice cream after." "Before you go," Catherine said, pulling out one final document. "This came by courier this afternoon. It's from Marcus." Elena took the envelope, recognizing his handwriting on the outside. Inside was a single page, handwritten. "Elena, I know you won't believe this, and I don't expect forgiveness, but watching you build what you've built, seeing you become who you've become, I finally understand what I destroyed. Not the money, not the oil, but you, the woman who loved me despite my flaws, who stayed despite my cruelty, who only asked to be treated with basic human decency. I threw away the most valuable thing I ever had the night I threw you out in that storm. And every day since, I've paid the price. I don't expect you to care. I don't even expect you to read this, but I needed to say it. You were right about everything, and I'm sorry." Elena read it twice, then set it on Catherine's desk. "File it with the rest of his correspondence." "You're not going to respond?" Catherine asked. Elena looked down at Rose, who was now making her stuffed derrick drill for imaginary oil while making engine noises. Her daughter, brilliant, fierce, loved beyond measure, who would never know what it felt like to doubt her own worth, because her mother had learned that lesson the hard way. "No," Elena said. "He doesn't get my words anymore. He doesn't get my time, my energy, or my forgiveness. He gets to live with his choices, just like I get to live with mine." She took Rose's hand, and together they walked toward the elevator. Behind them, Houston spread out in a glittering sprawl of possibility. Ahead, the rest of their lives waited, not perfect, but theirs, built on truth instead of lies, on strength instead of manipulation, on the bedrock certainty that they were enough exactly as they were. "Mama?" Rose asked as they descended. "Auntie Catherine says you're the most powerful woman in Texas." "Does she now?" "Uh-huh. Are you?" Elena thought about power, real power, not the kind Marcus had wielded through cruelty and control, but the kind her grandmother had carried across oceans and through wars. The power to survive, to build, to protect, to lift others up instead of tearing them down. "I don't know about most powerful," Elena said, squeezing her daughter's hand, "but I'm free, and I'm happy. And I make sure other people can be free and happy too. That's better than powerful." Rose considered this with the seriousness only a 5-year-old could muster. "I think Grandma Rose would be proud of you." Elena's eyes stung with sudden tears. "I think so too, Baobei. I think so too." They stepped out into the Houston afternoon, the sun warm on their faces. Somewhere across the city, Marcus Hartwell was losing everything he'd schemed and betrayed to get. His company was bankrupt, his reputation destroyed, his chance at redemption long past. Elena felt no satisfaction in his downfall, but no pity either. He'd made his choices, and consequences were simply the universe's way of keeping accounts balanced. She'd made different choices. She'd chosen to fight instead of surrender, to build instead of destroy, to protect her daughter instead of repeat the cycles of harm that had marked her own marriage. And every morning when she woke up in her penthouse apartment, with Rose sleeping soundly in the next room, she remembered that the best revenge wasn't bringing Marcus to his knees. It was standing tall and never looking back. The valet brought her car around, a sensible SUV, because she was still Elena at her core, and some things money couldn't change. Rose climbed into her car seat, chattering about ice cream flavors and whether chocolate or vanilla was objectively superior. "Both are good, Baobei," Elena said, pulling into traffic. "You don't always have to choose. You can have both." "Can I have both today?" Elena laughed. "Yes, today you can have both." Because that was the lesson Marcus had never learned, the one that had cost him everything. Life wasn't about taking, about forcing others to choose, about diminishing people until they fit your vision of what they should be. Life was about abundance, about creating enough space for everyone to thrive, about recognizing that other people's joy didn't diminish your own. Her grandmother had known it. Robert had known it. And now Elena knew it too, bone deep and certain. Chen women survived, and sometimes against all odds and in the face of every cruelty, they did more than survive. They built empires, they changed lives, they won.